Welcome back, guys. I am back at my apartment here in Colorado after shooting for about 3.5 weeks out in Ohio on this recent Chrome doc that the last couple of vlogs have been about. But this week I wanted to just do kind of a quicker vlog about a little bit of color grading. So there's a couple quick clarifications that I want to get out of the way first because it did have a bit of a clickbaity title on this one. The first is to say that cinematic, I understand, especially on filmmaker YouTube, is a really broad term. It means something different for everyone. And so I'm really trying to dial this one in with a cinematic aesthetic, a specific kind of one that I prefer that looks a little bit more like the movies in Hollywood. It's not a catch-all, of course. I am just angling towards a specific look and aesthetic of a lot of the cinema and the movies that I like and that are in somewhat of a similar genre to what I like to shoot in when I'm working on my professional projects. And this is kind of a one-click way to get in the ballpark of that look. Now, this isn't how I color grade all of my projects. This is sort of like a down and dirty, one click and a drag sort of solution. I'm gonna do a video more extensively about how I do all of my color grading a little bit down the road here. Lastly, of course, your look should be dependent on your content. So this is a look that is based on a lot of the content that I enjoy consuming. It's kind of that David Fincher type look. He does a lot more dark and gritty type material, and I really like to try to create some dark and gritty type material myself. And he has a lot of yellows and greens in a lot of his movies. That's one of the palettes that he leans on a lot. And I find it coming out in a lot of the footage from cinema cameras that I see. Now, sometimes this sort of like green cast in the shadows, for example, is something that people will correct out because they don't want it in their images. I find it's more of a byproduct sometimes, shooting higher ISOs on cinema cameras, but I've come to associate it with a more professional, high budget type of look where these cameras are producing this. A lot of people grade in that type of direction. And so I was hoping to coax it out of some of my footage, even when I was using much cheaper cameras. But it's always been a look that I've loved. I've loved a heavy green, teal, yellow cast in a lot of the content I consume. And because I'm working in these similar genres, I tend to try to push my stuff in this direction as well. So what is it? What is this like one click, technically a click and a drag, I suppose, that gets you in the ballpark? Well, let's jump into it and check it out. So let's get started on this. We're jumping into Premiere right now. Now, I do most of my color grading in DaVinci Resolve, but this is a very simple sort of approach here, and so I'm happy to show it to you in something like Premiere. This works in basically any editing program as long as you have color curves. So we've got this shot here of Greg from the B-roll sequence that you saw in the last vlog. And this is what it's like straight out of camera. This is the log profile. You might be shooting something that just kicks out a regular good looking image. Even if you're using your phone, it's gonna look like that. So the basic thing we have to do is color correct first, and then we can color grade after that. So this first part, I don't want you guys to worry about it too much because we're basically just getting this log image to be a good Rec 709 and basically look balanced and nice. But it's the color grade part that is gonna be the part that is the one click. So let's just really quick here, I'm just gonna pop in. We're gonna pull up our log conversion. This is a Z camera, so it has its own sort of plugin for log conversion, which is very nice. This shot was about 3 stops overexposed. And for reasons later, I want this shot to be a little bit cooler. So this is a little bit more of a creative technique right here, but you'll wanna make sure that your shot is balanced and sort of appropriate. Up here in basic correction, I do want a little bit more contrast in this. This is still just kind of your basics to get it looking good out of camera. And that looks pretty good to me. So this is more or less an out of camera shot right here. It's looking good. Doesn't have any sort of creative look on it though, other than being a little bit cooler than it probably would be. So really, the one thing we're gonna do here, we're gonna pop into our curves. We're gonna open our blue channel, and we're just gonna grab this white point here, and we're gonna bring it down to add yellow into the whole scene from there. And just like that, we're done. We've got that cinematic look that I like. So let me explain this a little bit first to show you guys what this is if you don't understand what curves are and how I justify this as sort of a one-click simple process. So what are curves for those of you who don't know? So your color curves basically are this very simple grid with this line that you can customize and move around in the middle here. Down here in this side, you've got your black point. Over here you get brighter and brighter. This is sort of your shadows, this is your midtones, this is your highlights, and then this is your white point, more or less. And then vertically, you just have lighter to dark in the same way. So down here, it's very dark, up here, it's very bright. So basically what you're doing is if you want your shot to be brighter overall, you just grab a point in the middle, you move that line up and it gets brighter, or you move it down and it gets darker. Very simple. Basically, contrast is just darkening your shadows and brightening your highlights. So you darken your shadow, you brighten your highlights. And this is what's called an S curve because it creates a bit of an S here in the line and it adds contrast into your shot. Now over here too, you can also manipulate your black point or your white point itself. And so this will be changing the blacks and the whites of your shot. So if you want to crush your blacks and just take all those shadowy parts and make them pure black, you can click and drag that point and drag it, which makes everything very, very black. Or if you want more of the faded look, you can add white into those blacks and then all of those black points fade out. Same with whites. If you wanted to add more white, you could drag this over and clip those highlights, but make them very, very white and bright. Or you can bring it down and add black into those and it gets darker and darker and darker. Now, I don't like to use these too much because they're very destructive, and typically you want a nice dynamic range where you want just a faint little black point for just some of the things in your shots to be black. And really you don't want any highlights blown out. So going the whole way up to a perfect white point isn't necessarily ideal. But you can also do this with colors. So you have these RGB, you got your red, green, and blue. And by clicking in the middle, you can either add red into your scene, into your midtones, highlights, shadows, whatever, or you can pull down and you can add the opposite, in this case, which is teal. Same with green, you can add green into your shot, or you can pull it down and add magenta into your shot. And with blue, you can add blue, or the opposite there, in this case, is yellow. All right. You can do a lot of color grading with just these curves because at this point it starts to become mixing and matching. So if you want an overall very orange look, you can either add yellow by pulling down your blues, and then what else does it take to get orange? You need reds. So you're gonna pump up the reds, and then you get a very orange looking shot. So by doing this, when you pull this down and you're adding yellow into your whole shot, you're adding a lot of yellow into your white point, a lot of yellow into your highlights, a medium amount into your midtones, a very little amount in your shadows, and nothing in your blacks. So what's nice about this is you're preserving your blacks. When you're talking about professional color grading, you don't want to pollute your blacks or your whites because it looks unnatural and it's something you don't see in Hollywood very often at all. Unless you have like a cross-processed film look you're going for, you're never gonna go to Hollywood and watch a Marvel movie and see all the shadows turn blue like this. It looks amateur, it's not natural, it doesn't look pleasing to the eye, so you don't really want to inject color too much into some of those areas. And so I like doing this because the shadows are still protected and your deepest blacks are still relatively true and they're not tinted. Now doing this into your highlights though is also a no-no, but it's a little bit easier to do this because in Hollywood, if you're doing a professional shoot, you're not gonna blow out your highlights. And a lot of the time you're not even gonna push your highlights in post to the full white clipping point because it's just too bright that way. A lot of times in Hollywood, you don't want your brightest highlights to be right here at 100%. In a lot of moodier scenes, your highlights might even, with a bright light, live around 70, 75, 80% here on this scale. And so by adding this color into your white point, it isn't necessarily a bad thing if you don't even have a white point in your shot. It will still look natural because this should not be white, even though I did kind of blow it out a little bit. Because it's not living up here at 100%, it's not necessarily expected to be pure white. Now, protecting those is a different color grading episode. I'm gonna get into that later, but this is why it's sort of an easy solution because it gives you that look. You're getting different amounts here. You're protecting your shadows. And why I wanted this shot to be a little bit cooler is because of basic color science. If you're taking out that blue, you're adding in that yellow. That yellow is gonna blend with the blue that's already in your scene, and yellow and blue is green. So you're gonna get that greener kind of look very faintly in the shadows and the mids, but your highlights are gonna have a lot more of that yellow, which looks natural for your bright light sources. I think right around here is good. You're just getting that extra look that gives it that sort of like cinematic edge. So this is some footage from the Canon EOS R. I was testing it out with my girlfriend and her pup down at the park, and we're just gonna see how the same effect looks on a different camera that's not a cinema camera. So we're just gonna convert the C-Log footage into Rec 709. We are going to correct our exposure a little bit here. Again, you don't have to worry about this part. We are in DaVinci Resolve just because I prefer that to the Canon LUTs that I have right now. So our sky is a little bit blown out because this camera doesn't have the dynamic range. I was shooting a little overexposed to protect my shadows. So it goes. So what we will see here is a little bit of yellow added into our blown out sky. Won't look as professional, but I think it's gonna get the job done just fine. So we're gonna pop into our curve, select our blue channel. We're gonna go ahead and bring that down. Look at the way that comes alive right there. It amplifies the green that's already there, almost too much sometimes, but you get this really nice warm look. You've got the yellows very subtly injected, and it brings out the greens in some of those green and shadow areas. And you just instantly have sort of a normal naturalistic look, and it just goes to that touch of what I deem a little more professional and cinematic. So really there you have it. That is my kind of one-click solution to a cinematic aesthetic that I like, and maybe if you guys like it too, you can try it out. There's more you can do with this by playing around a little bit. You can take those greens down and that lead a shot if you want, but for the most part, it's gonna get you a little bit more in the ballpark of a cinematic look that I enjoy as an aesthetic. And you guys can try out on some of your projects too, where it's appropriate. Thanks for hanging out. We're gonna do more of this, get into some of the basics as we go coming up here, so stick around. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you wanna see more from me, like Twitter, Instagram, whatever you wanna do. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll see you next week.